Good morning, Hockey Nation Live. This is Michael Velano, and we are here for the early show. Coach Frenchie has some other obligations, and I apologize because I've been a little bit unreliable last few weeks between WHL training camp and some business travel last week. And Coach Frenchie did what he normally does, which is hold down the fort. Today we have, looks like Enertap has jumped in. Good morning, Enertap. Thank you for joining this morning. What I was hoping to do is a couple things. There's not a lot of news out, but what we see is this week are the development camps for different teams. And I just wanted to take a look at a couple teams, one being the Montreal Canadiens, and see who they've invited to their development camp. This is where the young prospects and draftees, and I think usually it's anyone under 21. Sometimes there's guys that are a little bit older though, 22, 23. And I would anticipate some walk-ons, but mostly it's drafted players or players that have been signed. And we get a chance to basically see them compete, number one, in their own camp and then against other teams. So the big events that we have coming up in the next week or so, we have the Traverse City Detroit Red Wings camp. We have Montreal has their development camp. And then we have the Traverse City tournament, which will be Detroit Red Wings, Toronto Maple Leafs, Dallas Stars, St. Louis Rookies, and Columbus. I think those are all the teams. We also West have the West Coast Development Tournament, and so we'll see the LA Kings, San Jose Junior, the San Jose Sharks, the Anaheim Ducks, Phoenix Coyotes. I don't think we've heard anything about what's going on in Seattle yet. I think a lot of that is a result of what's going on with the arena there. So we'll check in and see if there's any updates, although there is one update of a signing that we'll talk about briefly with the Kraken. We also have the development camp roster that we want to take a look at and some of the news that's coming out of Detroit. So we'll look at both the rosters for the development camp in Montreal and Detroit and kind of comment on some of the players. Who are you interested and excited about seeing, and are you going to make an effort to watch any of this? So the first thing that I wanted to talk about, though, was the signing, another announcement of a signing by the Seattle Kraken. So they've announced that they've signed Ryan Donato. And Ryan Donato came out of Harvard. His father's Ted Donato, who played a little bit in the NHL with Boston, and I think he was with Anaheim. And Ryan Donato was, he's had mixed results, right? So last year he played with San Jose Sharks. He's played with Minnesota, and he had pretty good results in Minnesota. Hey, good morning, Chainsaw Man. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Let me know who you're thinking about, that you're interested in seeing, and when we take a look at the Montreal Canadiens roster, and if you're interested in the rookies that are going to be in the development camp for the Detroit Red Wings. We'll take a look at who's been invited to those. So just, again, touching on Ryan Donato. So this is another curious signing for me. If you look at the Seattle roster, you've got to think like maybe they're not really that worried about making the playoffs or being competitive. Whereas we know with the Las Vegas Golden Knights, they're extremely competitive right out of the gate. They're very aggressive on making moves with draft, accumulated a lot of draft picks. We didn't really see the same thing with Seattle. Good morning, Johnny Golden. Thank you for joining us. Another excellent Montreal Canadiens fan joining us. Just talking very briefly about the Ryan Donato signing. Let me know what you guys think of this signing. For me, Donato's kind of had a hard time sticking. He's not a perfect player. He gets a 1-year, one-way contract for $750,000, which is, extremely reasonable. He's had, $1.9 million was his previous salary. He had 14 goals in 62 games of the Minnesota Wild in 2019-20. And last year, I think he had like 6 or 8 goals. We'll take a look at his stats. This description, I think, is accurate. His shot isn't particularly dangerous. I don't know. He's not like a super offensively. He's a smart player. He's a little bit undersized. And he's had some points in the NHL, so he can produce, but typically I would say like in a third line role. We know that with the Kraken, that they're going to be starting the season without Yanni Gourde, who is probably, frankly, the best centerman that they picked up in the expansion draft. And if you look at Donato, he came fairly heralded out of Harvard, had a great final 2 years at Harvard, including 43 points, 26 goals in 29 games. So he is capable of scoring a little bit. He had 5 goals in his first 12 games, which I think was a little bit of an aberration with Boston. Then you can see the season after, whether it was expectation or whatever it might have been, he was part of the Charlie Coyle trade. So Minnesota trades Charlie Coyle to Boston, and one of the central pieces that came back for Charlie Coyle was Ryan Donato. He had 6 goals in 34 games. With Boston was a -11. I think that's pretty telling. And then a -4 in 22 games where he scored 4 goals and 16 points. So he is capable of getting points in the NHL. And you can see the season after, he kind of had some success with 14 goals and 9 assists. He was a +5. So that was positive. And then he goes to San Jose. And frankly, San Jose is fairly deep on forward. So he's going to be relegated to 3rd or even 4th line duty on that team, despite their struggles. So he dipped quite a bit to 6 goals in 50 games, but he has shown. So for $750,000, this is a worthwhile experiment for Seattle. And, frankly, their team is not looking super deep on forward. It's okay, right? Like, it's not out of this world. So you've got to think, too, that they're going to be starting without Yanni Gourde. And if you take a look at the Seattle Kraken lineup, it'd be interesting to see if he fits in the kind of the top 9, which is, even then he might have a hard time fitting into this. Now, the thing is, we know that Yanni Gourde is going to start the season on the injured list. So that leaves one spot that still is open. Oh, that's interesting. What happened there? Brought me right back to the beginning. So I don't know. What do you think about this signing? Is this someone that you think will have success in Seattle, or is this just kind of another stopgap? Once Gord's back in, Donato's not going to play center. And then you look at their wing positions, and I think he's going to have a pretty hard time cracking this lineup. So he's an interesting player. He's got some talent, obviously. He's a little bit undersized, but this just seems like a depth move by Seattle. Overall, you've got to think this team will probably be competitive, but have a hard time making the playoffs. And I would think at some point that they move out Mark Giordano when that seems obvious. They're strong in goal. They still have depth at all these positions. So interesting move. I don't think this is going to have a huge impact. I don't know what you guys thought. Matthias Norlander. Yes, I would agree. Norlander. So if we take a look, let's go and take a look in a second. Good morning, Kimberly. Good morning, Roger. Thank you for joining us. Why France is saving so much money? Is he at the floor yet? He's pretty close to the floor. So if you look at the cap situation, that's a good question. Where are they at in their cap situation? They're definitely in the bottom here, probably, right? We know they had some of the players they drafted to sign. So they're at $73 million. So even though they only have 8.4, according to this. So they've crept up. And I think that's after they've signed a bunch of the guys that they had picked up. So we know that some of the players they picked up initially looked like they were about 67, and then they made some signings of guys. They've given 4.5 times 3 to Wenberg, so it'll be interesting. I don't anticipate him even in repeating the production he had this year, but you never know. So yeah, they're past the floor because I think the floor is like 67, so they're at 73. So maybe this is not such a bad place to be. They have 8.4 million. I would anticipate at some point they move out of Giordano. He's only got, he's 6.7 against that. He's 37. He's going to want to compete in the playoffs, and he's going to be UFA. So unless they sign him to a long-term contract, I guess it depends on, how competitive they are. They should be at least competitive. I mean, they're going to be able to compete. Donato is a bottom 6 for sure. Can't go wrong with his contract, right? And at $750, I think it indicates that, hey, you might have a hard time cracking our lineup. I think he has a hard time cracking a lot of NHL lineups. So I think that's part of it. Donato has not lived up to his hype. Not sure if he ever will. Yeah, and I don't know what the hype was. When he came in, I was like, he'll be okay. Like, I kind of thought, when you look at a player like this, you think, like, he could be supplanted by someone that would be more effective. He has the capability of getting points, obviously, so I think that's positive for them. So overall, you've got to say, maybe there's a bit of a plan here, right? They didn't get a phenomenal second overall pick. Like, Matty Benners is going to be a good NHL player, I think, but he'll be more along the lines of a Dylan Larkin. I think that's kind of what I'm anticipating. So he's not like a Shane Wright. He's not a Connor Bedard. And we're seeing those are two players, along with Michkov, Matvei Michkov. These guys all look like franchise players. So you've got to say, like, hey, if I'm Seattle, I want to be competitive. I want a foundation that'll last me for the long term. And I think that's kind of what they have. They have depth and they've got real good goaltending for a long time. So then you say, let me, if I miss the playoffs and I get in the lottery and I get a top 3 or 5, or maybe I get lucky and I get the number 1 pick, it's worthwhile because then I'll, next year's draft will be deeper. The year after will be deeper than the 2003 draft. So maybe that's part of their plan. I'm not sure. We know they do still have an issue with the arena. The arena's still not open, man. I don't think it's going to be open. I don't even know when their training camp is. You see this week, the development camp for a lot of these teams, and we're going to look at some of those rosters. They're open, right? They're playing in the development league, and we've heard nothing. Let's look and see, but I've heard nothing about Seattle's rookie camps. Let's see. Training camp dates I don't even think are announced, are they? Let's see. That's Seattle. Oops, that's football. I don't think that they've even been able to announce it. Now, they did open the community rink, and the community rink would be interesting. So the players are coming in, but I don't think they have specific dates. But you would think if that community rink is open, then that should be fine, right? Like that would be the place where they would have at the Northgate facility. So you're seeing unofficial captains practices at the Northgate facility. So that's probably what's going on. Yeah, so that's fine. Yanni Gord won't be available to November, so they made that note. So it looks like players are obviously coming in. They have to come in, but we have not heard concrete dates about their training camp. So it's a little bit weird. Whereas this week, let's take a look at it. They've built up a big defensive group who play against no one under 6'2", except for Giordano, who's like 6 foot. So it's a good point. And they have very good goaltending, and they've got depth at forward. Like, it's not like their forward lineups are bad. They just don't have offensive impact, I think. That's going to be the issue. Who's going to score goals? So they'll be competitive. That's probably what's going to happen. Matthias Norlander, Roger. So let's do this. I want to take a look, first of all. Let's look at, since there's so many Montreal fans here, let's take a look at the projected development camp roster for the Montreal Canadiens. I think they've announced 27 players. I printed this out, but let's do a search to do it. So, whoa, bad typing there. So they've announced 27 players, and let's just take a quick look at this. And there's a PDF in here that we can open up. There we go. Are you guys able to see that? You are. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So the first one is Tag Bertuzzi. And if I'm not mistaken, Tag Bertuzzi, I believe, is the son of the infamous Todd Bertuzzi and the cousin of Tyler Bertuzzi. So that's an interesting player. He's a 2001 birth year, so he's 20. He'll be 21. So let's just take a look. What to expect from Tag Bertuzzi? Is this a player that they drafted? I can't even remember. That's kind of crazy. Or is he just an invited player? Yeah, I don't think he even played last year. Jeez. From Vancouver. His father's Todd Bertuzzi. His cousin is Tyler Bertuzzi with the Detroit Red Wings. And he's played, yeah, so the reason he didn't play last year, he actually played in Slovakia last year. So they sent him to Slovakia to play, that's like Brant Clark. He played in the second league in Slovakia, Hamilton Bulldogs OHL player, and I do not believe he is drafted. So that's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if he's able to catch on even with an AHL contract. So this is an undrafted player. He's gone through his draft year twice and has not been picked up. But he's obviously got good lineage, so that'll be interesting to watch. Any other names on this? Gianni Fairbrother. So we'll be watching for Gianni Fairbrother because Gianni is a third-round draft pick of the Montreal Canadiens and a former Everett Silvertip. He was actually the captain of the Everett Silvertips. He played 3 games with Laval in the AHL last year and 23 with us in the WHL. Real solid defensive prospect, so I'm really excited to see how Johnny does. Kaden Ghoul was a first pick, another former WHL player coming from Prince Albert in the WHL. Very, very high-end prospect, in my opinion. He played 3 games in the AHL and only 2 in the WHL. So that would indicate to me he was probably injured last year, unless there's something else. but I am interested in him. I think he's got a lot of potential. He's 6'3", excellent skating defenseman. So I'm definitely interested in seeing how he does at development camp and does, I would anticipate though that he's starting the year in Laval. We know Jan Macisaac. Coach Frenchie really likes this player. I do too. He's rated kind of like in the 10 to 12 of, if you look at the top prospects on the Montreal system, I think that's kind of the ratings that I'm seeing. But I like him. He's an offensively skilled player. I think he's going to take a little bit of time, but he should play in the AHL this year, and maybe he'll get some games in the NHL. I think he was in Hamilton as well with the OHL. So that's like the second player on this team that was, Tag Bertuzzi being the other one, being in that Hamilton OHL organization. You mentioned Matthias Norlander. It's interesting. He's listed at 5'10". I thought he was a little bit bigger than that. But, very skilled, high-end defensive prospect coming out of the Frölunda team in the Swedish league. He's a 2000 birth year, so he'll be 21 entering the season. He turns 21 in December, it looks like. So he's a late birth year. And a lot of interest in him. I don't know if he'll crack the lineup, though. That'll be interesting to see. Can he get in the top 6 of this team? Obviously, if not, he'll be in the AHL with Laval. The other player that I'm interested in seeing out of this is Yesi Lonen. He's a 99 birth year. And, so you've got to think he's got to crack the lineup sooner or later. He had a real good run in the AHL, 9 goals and 8 assists, 17 points in 29 games. He also played for the Pelicans. Liga is the Finnish league, I believe. That's interesting. Why isn't Liga the Finnish league? I thought he was, but he's a Swedish player. Let's see. Norlander had tough last game, -3 and benched in the third. Smelling like hockey's coming soon. No bling bling. Thanks for joining this morning. Yep, we're taking a look at the development camp rosters for the Montreal Canadiens, and then we're going to take a look at the Detroit Red Wings. Let me know who you're excited to see. I think Tag Bertuzzi is an interesting invite, Yannick. I agree. I think it'll be interesting to see if he catches on. We saw Tyler Bertuzzi. I don't think we had high expectations for Tyler. And look at him now. He's like a 20-plus goal scorer. He's led the Detroit Red Wings in scoring, albeit they have trouble scoring goals. But he's a gritty player that goes to the net. And I think Tag is very similar, a little bit bigger than Tyler's, who's his cousin. Johnny was a part of the Paxaretti deal. Is that true? I didn't realize that third-round draft pick came over from Las Vegas. Good morning, Greg John. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate Harvey Bernard, Macisaac, Norlander, Trudeau, Lonen to watch out for. So let me know about Harvey Bernard. I'm not terribly familiar with him, or I've heard Pierre talk about Trudeau. I just don't like his last name, frankly. So I hope he never makes the NHL. Okay, well, that's not really fair. Yeah, Norlander's now 6'1", so I thought that was odd. I thought he was bigger. I thought he was like 6 foot, 6'1". So that makes sense, Johnny, that he is bigger because he played in the Swedish league. I thought he grew overnight. So that's interesting that he's listed at 5'10" still. So you wonder if you can trust all of these numbers that are on here, but this is their roster, so that's really interesting. Are there any of the goalies that you're excited about? We see this kid. I don't really know any of these goalies. We've got Alexis Gravel, who's out of the queue. Joe Verbeek. I don't know him. He's an Ontario goalie. He's listed as 6'6", 190 pounds, so he's a prototypical size of an NHL goalie, but I'm not terribly familiar with them. So it looks like, I don't know what rep 2021 draft is. I'm curious what that is. And then this Russian goalie from Minsk is that Belarus? Yeah, it is Belarus. So you can see this goalie is actually pretty highly regarded, but he's an invitation. I think he's a pretty decent goalie, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he'll catch on with them. Good morning, Joseph. Thank you for joining. We're just going through the development camp roster and who you're excited about on the Montreal Canadiens. So William Trudeau is a defensive prospect. You can see here he's listed at 6 foot. Do we trust any of these numbers now? I don't know if we can trust any of them because, I was thinking we were talking about Norlander at 6'1", 190, and he's listed here at 5'10". So I'm not sure what that's all about. But, I do see the correct numbers for Kaden Ghoul and Johnny Fairbrother at 6'1". Thought he was 6 foot, but maybe he's 6'1" now. That's good. So those are all good prospects for Montreal. It'll be interesting to see. I don't know if any of these games are going to be on TV, and I'm curious. Let's see if they have. There'll be 3 games, home and home against the Ottawa Senators, plus a game in Brossard against a U Sports. So U Sports is the Ontario, or at least the Canadian university system. So that means they'll play against an all-star team from the U Sports. This is pretty high-end hockey teams. Even though players don't come out of Canadian college, the reason is because they've already typically played OHL. They've had an opportunity to get drafted or picked by an NHL team before they go to university. So there's a lot of players that are former provincial or former OHL, Q, or WHL players that are in the U Sports system. So usually that's a very competitive brand of hockey, and they might have a hard time even against those teams as a rookie team. So that's usually very, very competitive. They might even lose that. Okay, Harvey Bernard is a tenacious, intelligent, offensive-minded player. Impact potential is there if they can improve his skating. Okay, interesting. I have not seen him play, to be honest with you. So that's interesting. And I can't remember if they said he was a draft pick or not. Let's see, Bernard. He's listed at 5'9", 173. Is it rep draft? Is that the NHL draft? He had good numbers in Laval, 9 goals, 20 points in 36 games. So it's not bad. So that'll be an interesting player we'll keep an eye on as part of that. All right. So I did want to shift gears, and let's take a look at Sean Farrell. Yeah. So he's probably not signed. And so if he's going to play NCAA, he would not be able to go to development camp. So we don't usually see those players, but I agree. He's a good prospect. He's a smaller guy, but he's got lots of skill, smart player. So at some point, when he's done with college, it'll be interesting to see him in a development camp, but it doesn't look like it'll be this year, which probably makes sense that he should go back to college. I think he's a player that needs time. All right. So the other team that we wanted to take a look at was the Detroit Red Wings. So the Traverse City tournament is a bit of a tradition in Detroit. So they returned to Traverse City for their rookie development camp. If you get a chance, watch either past or the current camps, because I think it reveals like the level of both skill development and off-ice training that Detroit puts their players through to educate them on how to prepare for an NHL season. So I'm pretty excited about that. I think okay, so for Detroit, there's a lot of players that I'm pretty excited about. What are my thoughts on Bozak? To me, Bozak, if they had the money, it would be interesting to see Bozak in Boston, because I think that would give them a third center option down the middle. They have Holla, but Holla's always had a little bit of injury problems. Charlie Coyle is capable, like talent-wise. I don't just know if he has the consistency of being a second-line center. So they're going to really miss Krejci, and I think having a reliable guy like Bozak who can get 35, 40 points, wins faceoff would be really good in Boston. I could see Pittsburgh. I could see Montreal. I think he would be good in all those places, and it really depends upon what kind of contract he's willing to accept or someone's going to offer him. But he's a useful player still. He was at a 40-goal or 40-point pace last year, and we know what he does defensively. So he's an understated player that I think's won a Stanley Cup, and he would be valuable to any of those teams. I'm interested to see if Farrell can keep up the high production with Harvard. A lot less talent on that roster. Yeah, it's strange because his USHL team was stacked, right? Is he on Chicago Steel? Am I wrong about that? I think he might have been. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Let's see. So he's a Massachusetts-born player. He's older, he's 2003. So yeah, Chicago Steel. He had 101 points in 53 games. So that was they had Matthew Coronado, Eric Middendorf's real good player. His uncle played in the NHL. Josh Doan is Shane Doan's kid. Adam Fantilli this is a player that, he was 15, but he's going to be a real high draft pick in a year or two. Interesting to see where he ends up landing. But yeah, Chicago Steel were absolutely stacked. So he's an 04. So he's not draft eligible until the 05s go though. So he'll be in the, Adam Fantilli is who I'm talking about. Good morning, Brad Marchand's son. Unfortunately, we don't have Coach Frenchie with us, but I appreciate you joining us this morning. We've been taking a look initially at the Montreal Canadiens development camp roster, and now we're going to take a look at the Detroit Red Wings. This is the one that I'm quite excited about. I think there's a lot of players in here that will have opportunity to be impact players in the NHL in the future. The one notable omission from this was interesting to me, which is Moritz Cider. So we do not see Moritz Cider on the development camp roster. We know he's already played in the AHL. He played in the German Professional League. And last year he played, I believe, in the Swedish Elite League. So, what does this say about Moritz Cider? Are they penciling him in? Obviously, AHL at the worst case, but does this mean that he'll be in the NHL? They're like, listen, there's no point in putting this guy in the development camp roster. But interestingly enough, Joe Velano is on the development camp roster. So I think that's interesting because he finished the year up in the NHL. I don't necessarily think that means he'll be guaranteed a spot in the NHL, but he absolutely did not look at a place. So first off, we have Lucas Raymond, the 4th overall draft pick in 2020, very high-end offensive prospect, excellent skater, great forechecker. So I'm pretty excited about seeing him in this camp. Chase Pearson, they re-signed. He's a little bit older at 24 years old. I don't have a lot of hope for him playing in the NHL. To me, could be a bottom 6, but I think he'd even have a hard time cracking the Detroit lineup at that. Hayden Verbeek is, he was a draft pick. I think of Montreal, and he was acquired in a trade, but I think he'll be in the AHL next year. This is I believe the son of Pat Verbeek, Jonatan Berggren. This is the guy that we're like, can this guy be a Pavel Datsyuk type player in the NHL? Very, very, very high-end skill set. Had a phenomenal year in the Swedish Elite League last year. He had an injury in his draft year and went in the second round despite that, but he's a very high-end talent. And we've been seeing he's been training with Lucas Raymond in Sweden, and he's got the sort of talent that Detroit needs to start injecting into their organization. So it's going to be very interesting to see him. He's now 21, so time flies. But I think that this is a player that will probably start in the AHL, and I would say gets opportunity in the NHL. If he makes the NHL at a camp, I'll be very surprised, but that would be the exciting thing about this. Like, does he come in and absolutely light up the development camp? Does he come in and light up the NHL camp? And that's going to be what's really curious. Joe Velano is, this was a little bit of a surprise, and I'm not sure what the choice was there to put him in to the rookie camp. Maybe it says he still has a little bit to prove. So some of these other players, I don't anticipate any of these guys. Davis T-Bone Codd, he's an invite to camp from Saginaw, and Saginaw is owned by my cousin Jimmy Devellano, along with a lot of other investors, but also Chris Osgood. So that'll be interesting to see if this was a player that has potential to get a contract. Interesting, this Russian player still does not have a contract, so I think this will be his last shot. Jared Macisaac, I'm very interested in seeing. He's 21 years old now. When he was drafted, he was like a lowercase Noah Dobson. So Noah Dobson's had great success. Yeah, I would agree, Intertap. Detroit's moving in the right direction, stacked with prospects, and they'll become significant soon. Yeah, I would agree with this. I think that Stevie Yzerman, the Yzer plan has been in effect, and he's trying to pull in good young prospects. So we're excited about this camp overall. Jared Macisaac has had injury problems, and I think that between that and COVID has delayed his development a little bit. But I compared him somewhat favorably to a Noah Dobson in that draft year. He's not quite as good as Dobson or high end. So I would like to see him get back on track, have success in the AHL, and then maybe in a year he's able to, compete for a spot in the NHL. Donovan Sobrano, I wasn't terribly high on this player, but he's kind of growing on me. He was a 63rd overall pick in 2020. He is signed to his entry-level contract. I mean, he'll be in the AHL. I think that's the obvious spot for him. But he's a reasonably talented defenseman. So a left shot defenseman, which they need. They actually shockingly have a lot of right shot defensemen in this team. So those are kind of interesting players for me. I've heard some about Alec Cotton, but again, I don't have much hope that he's an NHL-bound player. All right, in goal, this is really interesting. Finally, we have some interesting stuff to talk about in Detroit and net. Our 15th overall draft pick. Good morning, The Canadian Giant, yeah, they have 15 million cap space. There's a lot left in Detroit. So they're taking their time. They're bringing in players on short-term contracts and not unreasonable ones. And they have a lot of prospects, and they got some guys that can prove themselves in the NHL. When you look at that roster, I'm excited to see Matthias Suter in the NHL and see if he's able to build on what I thought was a pretty good rookie year last year. So Sebastian Cossa, the Edmonton Oil Kings goaltender, drafted 15th by Detroit. They traded up to get him, picking him ahead of Jesper Wallstedt, who many of us thought Jesper Wallstedt might even be a top 10 pick in the draft. Cossa is like 6'6" or 6'7". He's a really big goalie, very athletic. They have high hopes for him. Victor Bradstrom was a draft pick and then signed by Detroit a couple years ago. And you know what's he's an interesting prospect. Like, can he do some damage? I don't know. I think that's going to be interesting. He went in this draft where they had Joe Velano, Philip Zadina, Jonatan Berggren, Jared Macisaac. They traded away Regula. Jesper Eliasson was a big pick here, but Bradstrom was a little bit older and picked here. So he's 6'4". I think he's actually more like 6'5" is what I hear, but he's an interesting prospect in net, and what he becomes is unclear. Jan Bednar is another prospect. So even though they have the high octane pick of Sebastian Cossa, they have these other two guys in the system, and it'd be interesting to see, do they stick in the AHL, and are they legitimately long-term prospects either as a backup or something else in the NHL? I think goaltending-wise, Detroit's pretty set for this season between Nedeljkovic and Thomas Greiss, but we need someone like a Cossa. Cossa is the obvious one that in 4 or 5 years you want to see in the NHL. And it'll be interesting to see, is he on the same level as, say, Spencer Knight in a year or so? And I think that's the anticipation, is that he's kind of very similar to that level of talent. All right, so we've kind of gone through these rosters. Who are you excited about seeing? The other interesting thing to take a look at will be the schedule of this, because this development camp leads into the rookie tournament. And it's at the Center Ice Arena in Traverse City starting on Thursday. And it'll go till Monday. They'll have prospects from Columbus, Dallas, St. Louis, and Toronto, and they'll play in a tournament, in a round-robin tournament. And I think that culminates in the game on Monday between the top two teams. And usually you're going to see a lot of pretty interesting prospects there. I think Toronto's got some interesting prospects that are worth looking at. But let us know, who else you'd like to take a look at over this week. I'll probably take a look at LA and their development camp roster, maybe even Anaheim, because I think both of them have a lot of players that are going to be interesting to look at. We don't have a lot of other news or signings right now, because you can see we're getting into camp that, they're pretty much set on who's coming to camp. Just quickly, we did see some announcements last week. I don't know if we commented on these. Are minor signings probably, but there were some signings. So let's take a look here. One was Eric Goodbranson catches on with the Calgary Flames at 1.9. He played for $4 million last year in Ottawa. Michael Stone, he can be a reliable NHL defenseman. I know hasn't been around for a bit, but that, at $750,000, that's a pretty reasonable contract for him. Cooper Marody, I don't have much hope of at this point of cracking Edmonton, but he could be a good AHL player. He gets $750,000. My guess is this is probably it's $150,000 in the AHL. So he's on a 2-way contract. So I would anticipate that he'll play in the AHL for maybe the balance of his career. I don't think he's NHL bound. All right, guys, let me know. Do you have the Leafs? I don't know. That's a good question. I would have signed him by now. Unfortunately, I have to jump, but I appreciate everybody joining me this morning, and I will jump on with any news that happens. Otherwise, I will see you tomorrow, same channel, Hockey Nation Live, and the early morning show.